Hey everybody, I find people's stories to be inspirational and motivating. I always like hearing people's backgrounds and like how they got to where they are. So I thought it might be appropriate to take a little time today and kind of share my background. Obviously there's a lot of aspects to people's lives and it would take too long to tell everything. But I just kind of thought I'd share my entrepreneurial journey and kind of how I grew up and how it kind of influences what I do today. So kind of to start out, I grew up in a large family on a dairy farm here in southwest Michigan, in a little town called Martin. And some of my earliest memories were growing up on the farm, watching my family deal with the struggles that come with dairy farming, equipment breaking and employee issues and economic issues with, pricing and just trying to keep things afloat. When I was a kid, my dad would wake up super early and he'd go out and he'd feed the cows and then he'd come in for breakfast and then he'd go back to work. And I remember him working till super late at night, just trying to keep things going. I had the opportunity to grow up around my grandparents on my dad's side. My dad's mom and dad were the ones who had started the farm that I grew up on, and I got to spend a lot of time with them. And several of my aunts and uncles worked on the farm. And so I got to see from an early age how, people made things happen, even if it was hard. But when things were hard, it didn't matter. They just kept working and they had to get the job done because that's what that required. As I said, I grew up in the country, but I kind of always had that little entrepreneurial spark. My first experience trying to make money was, I think I was probably around 4 years old. I couldn't read or write, but I knew that people would put things by the road for sale sometimes. And so I asked my dad to help me make a for sale sign, and we took an old piece of wood and he put the number 4 and sale on it. And I set it out by the road and I dug up some old trees and put them in buckets, not old trees, little trees. Dug up some trees in the backyard, put them in some of my sandbox toy buckets and set them out by the road and tried to sell trees to anybody that was driving by. And my Uncle Dennis was actually my first customer. Like I said, I was really little, and he pulled up and he said he wanted to buy a tree. I remember him digging change out of his ashtray in his vehicle and buying a tree for me. I'm guessing he probably didn't plant it at home like I thought he would. But that was kind of my first little business, if you will. Again, I was super young, but that was kind of always there and a part of me. As I got older, I tried a lot of different things. My brother and sister that are closest to me in age, they always had that same kind of spark as well. So, we would try things together, we'd do things on our own. I would raise vegetables and try to sell vegetables to people that I knew. I'd take cucumbers to church and sell cucumbers for $0.25 or zucchini. Tried sweet corn a few times. And then as I got a little bit older, I bought animals, and I would started out with 1 pig. I bought a pig, raised it, sold it, and then I bought 4 pigs and raised them and sold them, and then I bought 10. And so as I was kind of going through middle school and early high school, I would buy animals, I'd raise them up, and then I'd find someone to buy them, and then we'd send them to a custom processor. And I learned a lot of lessons there. I had to be really careful about the money that I spent. I had to, if I was going to buy an animal and I was going to put feed into it, when you're 12 years old, $100 is a lot of money. And so I would have to kind of plan ahead and think about, okay, how am I going to feed this animal? Is it going to make sense? Am I going to sell it for more than I have into it? And then when the time came and the animal was big enough to send out for processing, I'd have to find someone to buy it. But I couldn't wait till the last minute. I had to anticipate when that was going to come and make sure that I had a buyer lined up at the right time. And started to learn, like I said, a lot of super valuable lessons about, interacting with other people, making sure that I was giving them something that they were getting some value from, and just learned a lot of things. And that was probably from the time I was 11 or 12 till I was maybe a junior in high school. Then as I got a little older, I got my driver's license. I would work a lot of odd jobs for people. Before I got my driver's license, people would come and pick me and my brother up sometimes to go do odd jobs at their house. And as I look back across my life so far, I see all these people, and there's some of them that really stick out in my mind, these people that were willing to take the time out of their day to provide an opportunity to me or people that I knew, and just be generous. You know, sometimes I wonder if some of the odd jobs I got hired to do when I was 12 or 13 or 14, if the person who picked me up, fed me lunch, and dropped me back off at home maybe could have just done the job faster themselves than going out of their way to do all that for me and then pay me to do those jobs. But then, like I said, I got my driver's license, and my brother and I started hauling scrap metal. That was like a dream to us, like to be old enough to have a driver's license and go around and do our own thing. And he's a couple years younger than me, so he had a four-wheeler, and he would drive up and down the country roads and stop at people's houses and ask them for any scrap metal that they had. And we would drive around and pick up scrap metal. We cleaned out a lot of fence rows. We'd peel down wire. For a time, we used an old van that my dad had. It's like a service van, and we would cram that van full of scrap. We'd go to the scrap yard, unload it, cash in for that day, and then go back and do it again. And we spent hours going up and down country roads and asking people for scrap metal. And again, just kind of looking back, I imagine myself if like a 14-year-old pulled up in my driveway with a four-wheeler and said, "Hey, do you have any scrap metal I could have?" Like, that might give me a chuckle, but people were generous. They helped us out. And that's kind of one of the things that set me up later to be able to do some of the things that I did in my early 20s. So we hauled scrap metal. I did some lawn care sometimes, and then kind of coming out of high school, my senior year of high school, I got a job at a construction company, or it was a fireplace company, and we would install fireplaces for people. I worked with my cousin there, and he taught me a lot. You know, we had to be very conscious of codes and making sure that we were doing things right, making sure that, you know, the fireboxes had the correct clearance from flammable materials, and making sure that when we were cutting a hole through someone's roof, that we were flashing it properly. We would sometimes have to run venting out the side wall of a house, and learned about vinyl siding and making sure that things were sealed. So learned a lot from my cousin. I worked with my uncle there as well, and that was a small family business. And again, I was young. I was observing a lot of the people around me, and I learned a lot of lessons. But I also saw how being unorganized in a business can be catastrophic. And that business that I worked at ended up going under a few years later. And I wonder sometimes, you know, if they were more organized and more diligent about making sure that things that were supposed to be done were done, maybe they could have survived the hard times that came around in 2008, 2009. So after that, I moved to Argentina for a few years. That had been kind of a dream of mine to go to school there after some people I'd met, both from Argentina and from other countries that had gone to a school there. So I went to Argentina in 2008. I stayed there for about 2 years. I studied. I worked at a church plant and at a school. And again, I learned a lot of new things. I learned that other people don't necessarily think just like you do. I learned to ask questions and understand how other people's perspective might be different on the world. And I met people that believed things that were very similar or the same as what I believed, and they still had a different perspective on the world because they'd grown up in a different place and a different environment. But then met a lot of people that, you know, think differently. And so I learned to not just assume that I knew what they thought, but to ask questions and understand the perspective that they're coming from. So I worked while I was down there. The school that I was at it was a requirement to work on campus. So I worked in the farm on the campus there, and then in the slaughterhouse, and made a lot of really great friends, some of whom I still talk to today. Then I came back home in 2010, and if you think back to 2008, 2009, 2010, those were very hard years economically for a lot of people. So when I came back, it wasn't like, you know, you could just walk, like now you could just walk anywhere and get a job. And so I ended up going back to work with my dad on our family farm, and worked there. I ended up working there for 7 years. I worked with my family, and that period of time in my life, really my early 20s, through my mid to later 20s, I learned a lot. On the farm, there never really seemed to be enough money or resources to do the things that we needed to do. So if we could, we did it ourselves. One of my first jobs when I came back to the farm is my dad had this tractor that had a hydraulic pump go out in the middle of the tractor, and it was pulled into what felt like 1,000 pieces laid all over our shop floor. And he said, well, I want you to put that back together. So one of the neighbors up the road had the same tractor, and I didn't know how the tractor had come apart because when I got home it was in 1,000 pieces. And so I would just go, I'd drive up the road, I'd look at their tractor and where the next piece was in the sequence of all the hydraulic pumps and hoses and how they were put together. And I'd figure out the next couple pieces. I'd go back to our place, put the next few pieces on, then I'd go back and look at their tractor and then just check my work as I went. I don't know how much time that one took, and then I did that over and over again. You know, we'd have something that would break, like a skid steer would have a hydraulic pump go out or blow a hose down in the bottom, and I learned to just solve those problems because there was no one else that was going to solve those problems for us. It had to be done. And I learned that if you're determined and you think about the solution to the problem and work yourself backwards from the solution, you can usually accomplish most anything. So again, we would do a lot of things ourselves. Things in agriculture and farming were starting to go better, and so we wanted to make some improvements to the farm and add some buildings. And so we were planning to pour a lot of concrete. And so instead of buying our concrete, which was going to be expensive, we ended up building our own concrete batch plant. Took us a few months. My dad bought a hopper from one place, and then he bought a steel silo for the powder from another place. We borrowed a dump truck and hauled in the stone to make for the aggregate. And then we used different pieces of metal, like almost scrap metal. And I learned to weld and welded this big tower to be able to pull a concrete truck under. And then we bought a concrete truck from a salvage yard. So several of my younger brothers, by the time they were like 12 years old, they learned to drive a concrete truck, which is a little funny. Not most kids can't say that. So we ended up building this batch plant. And again, we were just learning to solve problems on our own, and there were challenges with each one of those things that we tried to do ourselves. And I also found that there's some things you maybe shouldn't try to do yourself. There's people that have figured things out or are good at something, and it's worth the time to pay for their expertise. Again, learned so many lessons there that were super valuable and have served me since. And really the problem solving and being willing to look at any problem and say, hey, there's a solution for this, and we can work backwards and figure out what we need to do. And then because I have that entrepreneurial spark, while I was at the farm, I was trying different things alongside of that. In 2011, I had pinched my pennies and I lived very frugally and saved up the money to buy my first rental property. And I bought my first rental. One of my brothers and I, we would buy cars and fix them and sell them. So we flipped a few cars and did some things like that, did some side jobs. But it was always my job at the farm, and then I always had something kind of going along on the side. And we also tried a concession trailer like what you see at the fairs and the festivals. We had a fish and chips trailer one year. That was definitely an interesting venture. Really didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. We thought we could just buy the trailer and we would, the idea that if we build it, they'll come. And we thought we could just show up at fairs and festivals and they'd let us in, and found out that is a huge process to get lined up. Had to go through all the approvals with health departments and get certifications to be food safety managers. And then had to manage the inventory of the food that we bought to sell, and that ended up being pretty much a break-even venture after about a year of going to different festivals and setting up different places. But learned a lot through that. Again, sometimes from the outside it looks like you see these other people doing things and you see their business and you think, oh, it looks easy, or anyone could do it, or they make lots of money just because I think they do. But the challenges that people face in the different businesses that they try is just, it's mind-boggling sometimes. And so that one didn't really work out, but it was a good itch to scratch. And again, we learned a lot there. That was actually 2012, and then in 2013, I married my wife, Liz. We didn't date for very long. We were pretty confident in that decision to marry each other, so we got married pretty quickly. While we were engaged, we bought a duplex and then moved into that a little while after we had gotten married. So 2014 comes along. We were remodeling most of that duplex. Our son was born late that year, and life can be hard sometimes. And then going into that next year, 2015, life threw a lot at us. We had my first rental house. The tenants moved out. They kind of destroyed the place. They had some personal problems in their life, and it affected us. They didn't pay for several months rent, trashed the house, which is not too hard to overcome, but it just became this big snowball of things that we had to deal with. We had a miscarriage that year. I was working a lot on the farm. We had taken on that really big project at the farm that was consuming a lot of my time. And then we had bought another house for us to move into. So it was just work. I'd work at work, and then sometimes I'd go to the rental house and try to fix that up, and then go to our house after that. And my wife and I would eat dinner with our son on a blanket on the living room floor, and then we would work into the night trying to get the house ready. And then I'd get up at 5:30 in the morning and go back to work and do it all over again. And sometimes running that routine can put a lot of strain on life and in the relationships. And then later in that year, we moved into our house, and one of the new tenants in our duplex caught the duplex on fire and burned it out significantly. It was kind of a sad situation for one of the other tenants in the building. They had just come home with a brand new baby. They lost their cats. They lost all their stuff, and it was sad. And I remember going there it was like 2 a.m. after this year of just a lot of hard things in my wife and I's life. And I remember going there and seeing the windows that I had just installed, and the firefighters were bashing out the windows, and a family friend had helped refinish the hardwood floors in that building, and they just pumped so much water in there and it ruined the floors. And I just remember watching all this work, and really what was most of my net worth in the world just go up in smoke. And that was really hard. And then it got harder after that. We filed a claim with our insurance company. And you think, oh, I'm gonna just pay for insurance, and when bad things happen, they're gonna take care of me. And that didn't quite happen that way, because we had just moved out of the house. There was a clerical issue with the policy. It was still listed as if it was our residence, which it wasn't. We had moved shortly before that, and the paperwork didn't get switched around at the insurance agency. And so the insurance carrier denied the claim. And so I have this duplex that had taken so much time and so much work, and had been, like I said, most of our family's net worth at the time. And it's just sitting there in shambles. And I drive by it every day as I go to work, and we still had a small mortgage payment on that. And then the other rental house was empty, and that put us in a pinch financially. It was a pinch that I couldn't work out of. I couldn't, with my income at that time, I couldn't just outwork the problem. And we were running out of money as a family, and I remember being really stressed and concerned about that. And we prayed a lot about it and talked to a lot of people for advice. And thankfully, the insurance company had a special claims division, and they sent the claim there, and they ended up honoring the claim and then paying us lost rent for the months that they kind of dragged their feet. And it took several months. There was like a forensic analysis, and they had to interview me and the people who were in the house at the time. And it was a lot of work to get through that. And they ended up paying out the claim. We were able to fix the duplex. And then in 2016, we ended up buying some more rentals. Things were kind of like new normal, I guess, if you will, for us and our family. But I was starting to kind of think about something different than working at the farm. I really enjoyed real estate and enjoyed the rental properties other than the crazy things. But I worked hard to take care of the tenants that we had, and most of them were pretty good and paid rent on time, and I enjoyed fixing up the properties. So in 2017, our plan was that I was going to leave the farm and I was going to start a business that would manage properties for other people, and we were going to try to buy more properties ourselves, and then kind of do the projects and everything. And so in 2017, I told my dad that I wanted to leave in 6 months. I did a lot of things there. I did the bookkeeping on the farm, and I was responsible for the employees at that time. And so I wanted to give him time to be able to replace me and figure that out. So I told him at the end of the year I wanted to be done. And then that didn't work out that way. It was like a week or two later, I think, after we had that conversation. I was at work. One of our employees didn't show up for his shift, and I'd been working since 2 a.m, and it was like around noon is when he was supposed to come in. And so I was super tired. I'd been working again since 2 a.m, so I wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing. And on the dairy farm, when it's time to milk the cows, you go in the barn, you open the gate, the cows go to what's called the milking parlor, which is the area where the cows get milked. And then you go through and we would clean out each of the stalls, make sure that the stalls were clean, make sure all the cows got up to go get milked. And then we'd clean the alley where the cows would poop. We'd clean that out and then go help milk the cows. So I went in to take care of that since this person didn't show up. And out of the corner of my eye, I noticed like a flicker, and we had bulls that would breed the cows, and I kind of turned around and a bull came and just crushed me against a pipe against the wall. And so I was crushed. If you watch videos online of people like in bullfights or the running of the bulls where they just get absolutely just pounded, that's what happened to me. The movie that I've seen that had kind of the most realistic depiction of kind of what that situation felt like to me is there's a movie I think it's called The Revenant, where a guy gets mauled by a bear. I remember watching that scene and just cringing because it felt so real to me to relive that moment. And it was a bear, not a bull. But so if you want to know what it felt like, watch that scene in that movie, and it was scary. He crushed me, and it wasn't just like he slammed into me. It was like getting hit by a car. That animal weighed more than 2,000 pounds. He caught my abdomen with his head and ground my back against a single piece of pipe and kind of ground me against that pipe for a minute, and then kind of backed off, and I fell to the ground, and I crawled away. And I remember hearing myself screaming like a crazy person. And it was like I was listening to myself scream outside of my body, and it was bizarre. But I crawled to where I was kind of safe for a minute. I remember putting my hand on my back, and my back was swollen out like 6 or 8 inches. And I kind of laid there a minute and kind of took inventory of what was wrong. I pulled up my shirt, and all the skin had been ripped off from just below my belt to over my belly button, and my whole abdomen was purple. I could wiggle my toes, but my brain was just not in a good place either. And so I kind of took inventory of things, and then I was kind of between 2 sections of piping, so the bull couldn't get to me. And I kind of tried to pick myself up again and almost passed out. And so I laid there for a few minutes just screaming for help, but no one was near me, and it was noisy on the farm and everyone's far away. So I kind of laid there for a minute, and I thought if I just go to sleep, this is going to be over. I knew I was bleeding internally really bad. And that thought very seriously crossed my mind. But when I closed my eyes, I thought about my 6-month-old daughter at home, and I decided that I was going to fight for it. So I ended up crawling through the stalls of the barn, a ways down from where the bull was at, and got out into what we would call the feed lane. And I laid on the concrete, and I was still screaming for help, but no one could hear me. So I ended up trying to stand up, and every time I would stand up, I'd almost pass out. And so I ended up kind of like shuffling, like hunched over. I would shuffle until I almost passed out, and then I'd lay on the ground for a few minutes, and then I'd kind of get back up into a shuffling position. And I did that. I got out of the barn, and the barn was maybe a few hundred yards from the road, and I shuffled my way out to the road. And one of my brothers was driving by with a tractor, and he saw me. I waved him down. He got out of the tractor, and I said I needed to go to the hospital. And so he called my dad. My dad came, and he said, "Do you want me to drive you to the hospital, or do you need an ambulance?" I said, "I don't have time for an ambulance." I said, "I don't think I'm going to make it." So thankfully my dad's super cool under pressure. He drove me to the hospital, drove like super fast. And we got to the hospital, and once I got to the hospital, I kind of breathed a sigh of relief, but it was really hard to go through all of that. When I was in the emergency room, they were loading me onto a gurney, and they dropped me. They were trying to give me an IV in my arm, but I was bled out so bad internally that my veins were like collapsing. And so I remember the nurse trying to put an IV in my arm and just stabbing my arm over and over and over, trying to get the IV in. Finally, she got it. And that poor nurse she was an older lady. She had to pull my boots off, and I was covered in cow crap. And the poor lady had cow crap all over her by the time she'd taken care of me. But they ended up putting me in an ambulance, sending me to the trauma center in Kalamazoo. And I remember going in there thinking, not really knowing what to think. And there was a doctor, his name's Dr. Kratz. He was head of the trauma department. He's the one who operated on me. And I remember laying on the table, he came up and he's like, "Hey, what happened?" He was super calm, which was super reassuring in that time. He said, "What happened?" And I said, "Hey, I got crushed by a bull." And he says, "Are you on drugs?" And I said, no, I never did drugs or anything like that. And he said, "Well, we're going to check you out, see if we need to do anything, but we're going to take good care of you." He pats me on the arm, and then he pulls up my shirt, looks at me for half a second, drops my shirt and says, "Okay, get him ready, guys. He's coming back in for surgery." So they ended up putting me under. They split me open. I have a huge scar on the center of my abdomen. They ended up pulling me open, and I was bleeding internally. Luckily, none of my organs were ruptured, but they ended up stitching up my mesentery, and then they packed me full of sponges, and then they left me open overnight. And then they actually had me wake up while my abdomen was open, which was super weird. And then they put me back under and did another check through everything, and then they stapled me up. So after that, I was in ICU for a week. And coming out of that, I mean, there was just so many challenges figuring out what I could do and what I couldn't do. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot in the hospital. I watched the people that were there to take care of me and other patients. And there's some people that are just so passionate about their job that they make you feel important and cared for. And then there's other people that aren't that way. And there was a few people that worked in the hospital that were challenging to be around. And as I kind of came out of that time in my life and started to build a business, it's something that's always in my mind. Like, I want to be the kind of person when I serve someone that actually cares about what I do and not just be there just because I need a job. And I've tried to surround myself with people like that too. Because at the end of the day, when we as Property Revolution come to your house and we put in a door or we install your siding, that's your home and that's your people that are in there, and we want you to feel important. And I've been through situations where not everyone sees their job that way. So coming out of that, like I said, there was a lot of struggles figuring out what new normal was like. My vocal cords got messed up because I was intubated. So I kind of really struggled. I had gone from being a super capable 27-year-old who could do a lot of things to sitting in a chair, not being able to do anything for myself. My wife was awesome. She took really great care of me through that time. It was really hard on her too. I couldn't talk for months. I had my real estate license and I'd been selling some real estate on the side, and I had a lot of people that really helped me out during that time. People who were compassionate and were willing to work with me even though I couldn't talk on the phone. Like I would text a lot, but I also found out I had severe brain trauma from that accident, and I couldn't remember like 2 digits in a row, and I had to do occupational therapy for months. I'd get these super debilitating headaches for a long time after that. So coming out of that time period in my life, there was a lot of fear. I didn't know what life was going to be like. I was depressed about not being able to do the things that I could do before. And like I said, my wife was super supportive, but that puts a strain on anybody. And so we kind of continued with the plan to build a business. As I kind of got back on my feet, we managed more and more rental properties for people. We started doing more projects. One of my brothers became my business partner for a time, and we kind of started to grow a little bit of a team. And at the beginning, it was just, what can we do kind of inside of this realm of this business that we have? And so we did a lot of different things. We did the property management for people. We would take care of like the outside of the property, like we did tree removal and snow plowing. And then we do projects inside and outside of homes and buildings. And we learned a lot of hard lessons that way too. And I started to kind of observe other businesses and people who were successful. And I can't really think of anyone who's successful who did a million different things. And so kind of getting close to 2020, I kind of had taken a step back and looked at our business, and I said, hey, there's few things that are really great. We love doing them. The team that we have to do them is awesome. We have some really great people. And then we have all these other things over here that we're trying to do that just don't make sense, and they cause a lot of headaches. And we're not that great at doing them for people. So in 2020, we changed gears as a company. We went from trying to kind of be an all-inclusive solution, if you will. We decided that home exteriors is where we're going to put our focus. So since then, we've narrowed our focus down to roofing, siding, decks, and fences, the exterior of the home. And that's the area where we feel like we do a really good job for people. And since then, we've really been honing in on that. And so since 2020, we've started to build out our team more, make sure that we have good processes in place for people to follow, and trying to hire more based on values alignment, and making sure that we have a group of people here that care about what they're doing on a daily basis. So like I said kind of at the beginning, this isn't every aspect of my life. There's a lot more to do with family and faith. But I just kind of wanted to share how the high points in my life had kind of contributed to my journey. And the journey's not over by any means. But I've learned a lot of lessons, and I hope that my story can help encourage you today to be responsible, empathetic towards other people, and determined to make things happen for your own life. So I hope this is a blessing for you. Thanks everybody for watching.